excellence. How did East Asia do it? So Professor Wee Tiong is Professor in Mathematics Education at the University of Melbourne and the co-leader of the Mathematics, Science and Technology Education Academic Group at its Faculty of Education. His work is in initial teacher education and in service professional development, draws on extensive professional experience in mathematics, teaching and pastoral care across educational settings in Singapore and Australia. Prof. Wee Tiong's research interests include the harnessing of motivational constructs, especially values to improve mathematics education, including the fostering or maintenance of mathematical worldview. He is founding director of the 22 Nation Research Consortium called the Third Web Lab. Over the last decade, Professor has also been invited to present some 30 research keynote addresses. He is currently the editor of the Mathematics Education Research Journal. Prof. Wee Tiong is or has been a member of international and Australian government expert advisory groups. Examples include the literacy and numeracy test for initial education, the Australian Federal Government Expert Advisory and Research Group, and the Board of Trustees of the International Group for Psychology of Mathematics Education. He consults and workshops for education departments, schools, and other educational institutions. And the discussant for today is Dr. Yohana William from Peninsula University of Technology. So, Prof, you have 30 minutes to present, and then thereafter the discussant will have 10 minutes to discuss on your presentation. For those joining us online, may I kindly ask that you switch off your mics, and if you do have any questions during or after the presentation, you can type them in the chat box. So over to you, Professor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues and research students. I'm very happy to spend time with you at this Brown-Bagg talk today. And I would like to thank Simon for the invite. And I have the fortune of meeting Simon 2 weeks ago in Ghana. So he told me about your research group in the University of the Free State. So I am privileged to share with you my thoughts about how international educational performance rankings have been dominated by education systems in East Asia. Now, even though it has been suggested that the education systems in these countries have been doing well because they are Confucian heritage cultures, and I'm sure some of you may have read literature about this before, I don't think it helps other education systems because we all know that cultures cannot be transplanted from one location to another. And more importantly, I think it is not because they are Confucian heritage cultures, but I think there are particular features of these, of the Confucian philosophy, which contribute to the success of the East Asian education systems. And I think this is where different countries, different systems may be able to see and reflect if they can adapt or adopt some of these features. Now, I must say upfront that my training background is in maths education, and I was born and I was brought up and teacher trained in Singapore. So many of my examples will be from maths and from Singapore, but I think you can see that the examples will also be true for the other high-performing East Asian countries and cultures across East Asia as well. So now, what do we mean by East Asia? Now, in the context of education research, East Asia very often refers to the 6 education systems that are shown here on the map or on the screen. We have mainland China, and moving clockwise, South Korea, Japan, and I think if you can see my cursor, so this is Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Of course, there are many more other countries in East Asia, many of which have not done as well as the 6 that I've just listed. And this would include places like Mongolia and North Korea. At the same time, you can appreciate from the map that Singapore is considered one of the East Asian education systems, and yet geographically, it is located in Southeast Asia. So for this session, we will adopt the way that the term East Asia is used in educational research, rather than be guided by the geographical definitions of East Asia and where these countries stay in East Asia. So we'll be referring to these 6 places. Now, we often find ourselves asking, what is the secret behind the success of these East Asian education systems in TIMSS, in PISA, in maths, in numeracy, in literacy, in science? And I guess just to cut the story short and just get to the core of it, let me share with you a model that has been created from relevant research literature in the past, and also from my own work in cultural studies. And the model looks like this. So as you can see on the screen, this is an attempt at visualizing my explanation of why these 6 places or 6 systems have been performing so well across different subjects over the years. Of greater significance is the central core, which is labeled active education. And I will comment further on this central value in the next slide. For now, I would like to highlight that this central value is supported by 3 features, namely vision, teacher quality, and alignment. And by vision, I refer to the fact that each of these education systems identifying and adopting a desired future state of what an educated population looks like. So visions tend to be long-term, they tend to be aspirational, and even inspirational. So for example, we may ask ourselves, what do we expect, or what do we want an educated South African student to be able to do when he or she grows up? And that could be our vision for South Africa and for the community. The other feature, teacher quality, is self-explanatory. And as far as alignment is concerned, we are talking about alignment, or I'm using the term alignment to refer to the fact that the different stakeholders is working together with the same vision, with the same approaches to achieving the vision. So for now, I just want to highlight that these features need to be deliberate. They are not accidental. And when I talk about the 6 education systems later, you can see how these features are designed and part and parcel of the planning by the different systems. And that they contribute to explaining why these systems perform so well by the fact that they support the central value. And in other words, having the features themselves without the central value will not do also. Lastly, as you can see from the model, the central value and the 3 supporting features exist in an environment that is defined by culture and history. And we may say that the central value and the supporting features evolve from the cultural and historical context, which also shape what they look like. So let's now look at this model bit by bit, and let's look at the culture first. Now, first of all, when we think about culture, it is useful to remind ourselves that both culture and history are the 2 environmental contexts that will always shape any education system, whether it's in Africa or Asia or in Australia, where I'm currently working, as they do with other aspects of societies and civilizations. The cultural context in the East Asian education systems is very much characterized by the 2,500-year-old Confucian philosophy. And in fact, they are often seen to represent what is known as the Confucian heritage culture, or in the literature, CHC for short, Confucian heritage culture. While Confucian teachings might be concerned with many aspects of life, such as governance, parenting, leadership, political leadership as well, and interpersonal relationships, it is worth noting that education remains to be integral to Confucianism. And thus, education finds itself playing important roles in the different aspects of the working and personal life. And indeed, for the East Asian countries, that central valuing of active education is the very expression of Confucian thinking, which has traditionally been a guiding star governing how people live their lives in these cultures. And of course, in some other countries, when we think about culture, the Confucian thinking may not be there. SES disparity may be an important part of the cultural context, and definitely when I was in Ghana, that was a factor that impacts on me as well. So in the cultural context for Ghana, for example, the disparity in SES and how that affects performance between urban and rural schools, between private and state schools, between the category A and category C schools in Ghana becomes a cultural context that cannot be forgotten and which impacts upon the quality of education and attainment. So that's culture. Let's look at the context, the other context, which is historical. Needless to say, the history of any community would shape the beliefs, the mindsets and values of the people living within it. The history of South Africa would have shaped your mindsets, your values of what it means to be educated, or the importance of being educated, so on and so forth. So in our case here, with regards to East Asian economies, the different histories would have served as key lessons or inspirations guiding decision-making, assessments and evaluations leading to excellence. So if I take Singapore, for example, when Singapore gained independence in 1965, it was an extremely small island state. It is very small. The country is so small that you can actually travel from east to west, driving within 45 minutes. So it is a very small country, an island, populated by largely unschooled migrants from a variety of ethnic backgrounds. So to ensure survival in a region that is full of larger neighboring countries, the small island states with no natural resources simply has to focus on educating its masses so that they acquire the functional literacy and numeracy to survive. So as such, over years, over decades, in the minds of Singapore people, school education has often been associated with survival, a pillar of nation building and thus of extreme importance. On the other hand, if you take Taiwan, which is another one of the 6 East Asian economies, Taiwan was under Japanese rule for some 50 years, leading up to the end of the Second World War. And during this time, teachers were brought in from Japan and deployed to schools across Taiwan. So as a result, the Japanese pedagogical beliefs and values were passed on to local students as well as the teacher colleagues, so that this continues to feature in current day teaching and learning practices in Taiwan. And as you would have guessed, this includes the Japanese traditional emphasis on education, the importance of being educated, which is reinforced by the Taiwanese tradition themselves. So you can see how education becomes a very important central value in the Taiwanese culture. So these are examples of how the cultural and historical context shape the East Asian economies. So let's have a look at this central core. In the Confucian tradition, which the 6 East Asian economies find themselves in, learning is crucial because learning is key to being human. So education is not valued for the purpose of scoring top marks. It is not valued for the purpose of doing well in exams, but for the more intrinsic objective of bettering one's self and one's life. And Confucius himself believes that every human can learn, every human can be educated, no matter how old he or she is. And to achieve this, children and their parents develop from young the belief that effort instead of innate intelligence is the key to success. And I'm sure you can see how this links with what we know these days as fixed mindsets and growth mindsets. But 2,500 years ago, Confucius was already talking about the importance of effort over intelligence. So in the Confucian tradition, hard work is expected, hard work is celebrated, and students are expected to need to take the initiative in their own learning. And that's why I use the word active education. Students are expected to take the initiative in wanting to learn. And they will also learn, they also find out that learning and reflection are complementary to each other. They, you need to reflect in order to learn, and you need to learn in order to reflect, and it becomes a complementary cycle, reinforcing each other. So I think that is why I call this central value active education, simply than just simply calling it education. And in this whole idea of education in the East Asian economies, the teacher continues to play a very important role. The teacher's role in enabling and facilitating this active education is also important. For example, it is expected that teachers customize their teaching according to the perception of the student's readiness. And in fact, Confucius himself, 2,500 years ago, modeled this himself. When somebody asked him a question, the sophistication of his response would be dependent on his understanding of the cognitive readiness of the person. So he believes that as a teacher, as an adult, as a mentor, while everybody can learn, but as a teacher, you need to tailor, you need to customize your explanations in your teaching according to the ZPD of the students. And again, this is what he has been advocating before we also heard about it from Vygotsky. So, and this is why in some cultures like Taiwan, for example, Teachers' Day is celebrated in Taiwan to coincide with the birthday of Confucius himself. So you can see how important it is. Confucius is in that culture, in the society, as a teacher, as an educator. Now, very quickly, let's look at the three supporting features. Vision. Active education itself is not sufficient. A system, a country needs to have develop a vision for education. And this vision has to be long-term. It is not something like an objective that can be addressed in a few years and perhaps change every few years when the next election is coming soon. So it has to be something that is long-term, something that is brave, realistic, and achievable. And in these cultures, there is an awareness against copying education systems from overseas, especially from the West, because there is an understanding that education is culturally referenced. But at the same time, the Western education system is very often held as the means of reflecting on how the local policies can be tweaked to support their own vision for education. Now, I noticed that I just used the word tweak, and that is important because it reflects in East Asia the relative stability and consistency of these visions of education in the systems. So these systems are tweaked rather than overhauled. I'll give you an example. The Singapore Maths Curriculum Framework, for those of you who teach maths, you may be aware that in Singapore, the Maths Curriculum Framework was first introduced in 1990, and until today, 33 years later, it is still the same. There may be some changes to some of the enabling factors, but the central core, the central belief has always remained the same from the day when I was still a pre-service teacher. So this is the vision, and this is an example of what I mean by the vision stays quite stable, and it allows teachers, schools, regions to perhaps fine-tune the factors contributing to this central belief. And in Singapore's case, it is problem solving for maths. Over in mainland China, the mathematics curriculum has been constructed based on the vision of two basics: basic knowledge and basic skills. And similarly, just like in Singapore, these two basics have not changed over the years. Even though there have been reforms to the curriculum, but these two basics, which is the strengthening and the learning of basic knowledge and basic skills, have been at the core of the vision for the maths curriculum in China. So these are two examples in which the stability in the vision for education is a characteristic of the East Asian countries. Reforms and fine-tuning, whenever they are introduced, they serve to support the vision. And this is different from introducing changes to fix the system, which is a rather deficit model of thinking. And this stability of the vision for education also facilitates another feature of a model that I'll be talking about, which is alignment, because it does facilitate alignment by the stakeholders. But before that, let's talk about teacher quality. It is important as well. In fact, in many of these East Asian education systems, it can be very competitive being successful in applying to be a teacher. So, for example, in South Korea, you need to be in the very top of the high stakes national exams in order to apply to become a teacher, and there's no guarantee. So you need to be in the top 2% of the cohort at the end of year 12 equivalent in order to become a teacher. So, and in that regard, the best students becomes the teachers, and there's a snowballing effect. Teachers are therefore very highly respected in the society. In Singapore, pre-service teachers are paid a beginning teacher salary right from day one of the pre-service teacher training as well. So there's the recognition from day one that you are and you have become a teacher. So the social status of teaching is therefore very high in East Asia. And this is in part supported by the society's embracing of Confucian emphasis on education. And therefore in East Asia, being addressed as a teacher is a very honorable thing to do. I was told by a colleague recently that this explains why the university academics in Japan, in Taiwan, they are often addressed as teachers rather than professors or doctors. So you don't go, you don't go to your professor and call him or her Professor so and so, but you address this person as a teacher. It is a much more honorable title. And this is why, for those of you who understand Japanese, our Japanese students and colleagues would address the lecturers as sensei, which is of course the Japanese word for teacher. So this is there's not just the emphasis on pre-service teacher training, but also as an in-service teachers in these East Asian countries. The education system actively supports professional learning and growth. For example, in mainland China, the teaching load for teachers in schools is relatively low. Only 50% of the timetable sessions in any one day is dedicated to in-class teaching. And the other 50% of the school day is set aside for teachers to have time and opportunities for planning, to attend PD sessions, and providing support to individual students. So I'm not sure whether that's the case in South African school system. So I'll be to be glad to hear that. And in fact, teachers in China are often engaged in research themselves. Now I'm showing you this online advertisement, and I believe that most of you may not understand what it is, but of course it is written in Chinese, and it was a online advertisement that was put up 2 weeks ago, and it is issued by a primary school in China, which was celebrating its 110th year anniversary last week. Now I'm showing this because I just want to, just to showcase an example. Here you have a school celebrating 110 years of anniversary. big time, big celebrations, memorable. Instead of concerts, instead of having parades, instead of having food and fun fair, the school celebrates its 110th year anniversary by hosting a 2-day pedagogical research forum showcasing the school teachers' research and inviting academics from the country to attend. So we can appreciate how schools in China are proud of their teachers' research and how through that, how they refine the teachers' expertise with research that is really tailor-made and meaningful in the local context. Okay, so let's quickly move on to alignment. Alignment is about how a synergy is fostered amongst different sectors of the society and a true alliance amongst the different stakeholders to realize school education vision and policies. And therefore, it is about putting in place a whole school system approach that facilitates coordination. And we can appreciate the importance of this when, let's say, for example, if I take an example from Shanghai, China, which recently have this plan on improving the performance of some schools that they identify as needing extra help. So these poorer performing schools are actually grouped into school clusters together with the stronger performing counterparts. And the performing schools in the cluster were asked to provide leadership for these poorer performing schools. So the schools come together to help themselves. And the effective teachers within the cluster were actually reallocated to the poorer performing schools who actually, or which actually needed them the most. So, you know, the effective teachers from the so-called better schools were actually allocated to these schools, and they become the models for the poorer performing schools. Now, of course, for these to succeed, I can't imagine this happening in Australia, for example. For these to have succeeded, school leadership and communities needed to agree to the clustering in the first instance. Individual teachers needed to support the whole idea of redeployment to another school, which can be quite far away from your house. So there is obviously an alignment between school leadership and communities to support all these things that are happening together for the school clusters to take place. And in the 1970s, if we look at Singapore, when the education system in Singapore was trying hard to catch up with the rest of the world, the policies introduced by the Singapore government involved systemic change, not at the local level, but at the national level. So what this means is that at the national level, everything will require an alignment of opinions, beliefs, and actions. And these will involve curriculum developers, textbook writers, teacher educators, parents, community leaders, private sectors, and of course, school principals and teachers. So everybody works together and have their actions aligned towards achieving the common vision. So therefore, alignment is important. And although I must say, the alignment can be a very tough objective to work towards for many countries and for many systems. And that is important to acknowledge. So here we are, this model which explains how the East Asian education systems have become so successful. And another point to note is that this is no less, and this other point is no less confusion than anything else, which is that this system does not sit still. It is ever evolving, just as the world around us is ever changing. So this model is alive, it is thriving. And if I have the computer skills to introduce the animation to this model, you will be seeing this model throbbing like a heart, throbbing with liveliness and vitality. And we can see this energy and
you have 5 minutes left.
And definitely, thank you. In recent reforms in China and Taiwan, for example, where we see how in China and Taiwan things are moving forward, where the teacher PD is looking at competencies, 21st century competencies. And again, this is an example of how they're moving forward rather than sitting on just the curriculum of 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And this is important. Now, of course, you will ask questions, and I think if we have the time, we can talk about this. You may ask questions about, East Asian migrant families. What about East Asians who migrated to overseas? What about the UK program for teaching for mastery? It isn't working so well, isn't it? There are other CHCs in the world. Why are they not performing so well? Of course, if we have time, I can explain how this come about. I just want to talk about implications for South Africa, or rather, I can't talk about implications for South Africa because I can't claim to know Africa, but I think I just want to end with these 3 points that we need to be aware of as we are thinking of and reflecting on the model. Firstly, there is no sign that the ongoing geopolitical situation in the world is going to go away anytime soon. Trade globalization will continue, but it will no longer be guided by economic efficiency, but rather by geopolitical priorities. And this will affect South Africa's economic strategies, and I believe economic outlooks and reforms as well. Secondly, Africa is resource rich, but Africa is now, just like Indonesia, is aware that the raw materials should be processed locally instead of being exported straight away. Again, this will create a different demand of labor skills and expertise with implications for school education. Thirdly, and lastly, the digitalization of data, information, and knowledge will increasingly be a part of everything we do at work and in leisurely life. Again, this will impact on governments putting in place reliable and affordable infrastructure to support the digitalization of work and life. It is no longer sufficient to give every school or every student a computer or laptop. It is about reliable Wi-Fi connections and so on and so forth. So this is how I want to end, and just to simply say that in this model, every part counts and every part is important. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Prof, for the insightful presentation. I now hand over to our discussant, Dr. Yohana Williams, to respond to your presentation. Dr. Yohana, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
So thank you very much, Professor Seah, for the very good presentation. Actually, I liked it, and I could say that I am very much impressed. And it is very good to learn the success of East Asia countries in education, as well as the success of East Asian children wherever they go around the globe. But of course, in your examples, I could see that most of them, they perform well in mathematics from United States of America, Australia, and the UK. But I hope maybe they are doing better wherever they are. So there is a lot to learn for sure from East Asian countries and East Asian children with regard to their performance. But Prof, my worries are on 2 things. Basically, the application of 2 things. Number 1 is the application of the 3 factors that explain performance of these learners. And number 2, again, is the application of the model. So the application of the 3 factors, my worry is to what extent this can be applied in the mainstream education. The mainstream education, I mean like the government education system. How the 3 factors which explain performance can be can be applied in the mainstream education, and also the model can be applied in the mainstream education. So when I was reading your work, I found that I'm starting with the first one, the 3 factors which explain the success of these learners. So it is about 85% of success of these learners is explained by a combination of school level factors. And not a single factor can stand alone. And the 3 factors is the school selection.
Asking Spotify to play some music.
The first factor is school selection, which means that in this
I'm not signed into the Spotify app yet.
in this
Once
country,
you log in, try asking again.
parents are able to select schools for their children. So the education system is a bit different compared to education system like in Finland, because in Finland you don't have to select any school. You can just send your child to any school. So there is school selection. And the other factor is school effectiveness, which is a combination of which make a school better, including school leadership, teaching practices and others. And the third factor is the peer factor. So what I am saying is that if you have school selection is a determinant, number 1, and if you are able to select the best school for your child, then automatically school effectiveness and the peer effect will work out, because there is an English saying that say birds of same feather flock together. So once you have the right school, then school effectiveness will come in the same ball, as well as peer effect, because it's kind of the same kind of people in that school. So to what extent is the performance of these countries or these children could be a reflection or a result of the mainstream government education system, which is for majority? Because once you have selection of schools, then the education system does not sound to be the mainstream education system. So to what extent this can reflect the mainstream education system, which is for majority? And number 2, I was also reading some works from East Asian countries, and it seems like there is hidden factors that is happening in this education system. So number 1 that I came across is the existence of the so-called private tutoring, or in other words, they call it shadow education system. So this is very common in some Asian countries. And even when the East Asians go overseas as well, they still practice it, private tutoring. And you can see this from works of different people. From 2006, Professor Maki Bray, even to 2022, Don, Zhang, and Lu. So it is something that is very serious that is happening in East Asian education system, private tutoring. But again, because of school selection, then it comes the question of socioeconomic status of parents. It comes into play because this is informing school selection. You can't select a school if you don't have that ability. And the other thing is about the culture as well. You have spoken about the culture, but also the culture to the individual family household. So you said that there is a culture about the ability of Asian parents to instill hard work ethics in their children. But actually this, from literature again, including the private tutoring, this goes together with abnormal working hard behavior of learners beyond the average child. Actually, children from East Asia, they are working very, very hard. They would wake up at 5 or 6 and then they'll get home again by 6. So it is actually beyond the average time a normal child would work. And actually, it's not just the aspiration to do better in education, but for the fear of disappointing the parents, perhaps. So you're working very hard just to impress your parents. So that is about the 3 factors. About the model, again, the model is about active education, and I agree it is very good, very much good. So, but to achieve active education, you need to have vision, you need to have teacher quality, and this should be aligned together. And the environment, which is culture and history, should come into play. But my question is, again, for mainstream education in the other countries to learn from this model, as much as it has worked in East Asian countries, but I think that for some countries, particularly African countries, including South Africa, countries can strive for an active education system by making sure that they have appropriate vision, like you said, vision is very important, so they can have appropriate vision, And again, they can have appropriate teacher quality. And they can align the two, or they can orchestrate the two, the vision and the teacher quality. I think this is possible. Of course, vision, as you said, it is a long-term kind of a thing, but I think countries can be able to do this, to have appropriate vision and appropriate teacher quality. But my worry again, as much as we would want to learn from this model, my worry is about the other environmental factors, which is culture and history. The culture and history of African countries is quite diverse and different from those of East Asian countries. And I think they are very strong. For example, if you take an example of South Africa, because of the apartheid, so this is both, it is affecting history and culture. The apartheid, has caused serious historical problems in this country. Therefore, you have, for instance, here in South Africa, community of the same kind of race staying in a particular area. So you have community for the Black Africans, and then you have communities for the colored, you have communities for the whites. And basically, this would reflect in schools. So you find that, you have schools that is mostly for Black communities, you have schools for colored, and you have school for whites, which is, again, it is a cultural thing, historical thing, and it is very hard to cross the boundary. It is very hard for a Black community to send their children to the white schools. And it is very hard for the white school community to send their children to the Black community school. So the socio-economic status again comes into play because of the ethnicities and, the historical background of countries like, South Africa. So I was also thinking, I don't have an answer to this one, but I was also thinking, yes, if you can have good vision and you can have good quality teachers, but how do you go about playing with environmental factors like culture and history in countries like, South Africa and others? So yeah, Prof, those were my two really main concerns about the presentation. The one is about the factors that explain performance in these schools, and some elements of the model that can be applied in the mainstream education as well as in some African countries. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yohana. Prof, if you can respond to Dr. Yohana's question before we take questions from the room.
So do I respond first?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Thanks, Yohana, for your sharing, and I think you have made my day, because I do want to come to this session to learn, and I think what you said about the history is something that I take away from. When I presented the model, I could have presented the model with the central core and the three features and ignoring the context, but I wanted the context there just to emphasize the roles the history played. And I think you have hit the nail on the head. That the history does affect how things play out. And I'll address that first, and then I'll talk about the other 2 points that you mentioned. The history of South Africa is very real. And in my last visit to Johannesburg, I think I did notice how the segregation. And on the other hand, in East Asia, something that I didn't want to mention earlier, one of the key features in 5 of these 6 East Asian cultures, in other words, except Singapore, is that they are all homogeneous populations. The Japanese is a society that is homogeneous, and the Koreans as well. Even in mainland China, 90% of the Chinese population belongs to the ethnic Han, and they have only one literature to refer to. So you can imagine how homogeneous the population is, despite the great numbers. So it is a contrast, and I think we need to take into account this cultural and historical context when we tackle what is in the middle. I don't have a solution for that, but I think I just want to, rightfully, that we need to take into account the cultural and historical context. You mentioned about the parents making school selections, and therefore some schools will have so-called better students, and the rest of the students go to some other schools. But we do see that also in the East Asian societies. The parents who can afford it, or parents who want to send their children to particular schools, will also put these children in some of these select schools, and the same applies across the whole China. What we can do, I guess the solution for us in terms of thinking about human development is that while we cannot stop this from happening, while we cannot stop the shadow curriculum from taking place, tuition will continue to blossom, although countries like China has made tuition illegal. But what we can do in the positions of governments is to make all the other schools as good a school as possible. So, for example, in Singapore, there is a slogan. The Singapore government has a slogan, which is that every school a good school. So yes, no doubt that there are the top schools, there are the select schools, but we make it a commitment to invest in every school with the teachers, with the resources, with the support, so that they can blossom in their own ways. They may not be as good as the top leaders. I don't think we can expect all schools to be equally top, but as long as they function well, and that's important, because if you look at TIMSS and PISA, the students for TIMSS and PISA for all participating countries are sampled across the country. So in Singapore, in Korea, in Japan, in South Africa, in Ghana, the students who take the test would have come from the top schools, as well as the community schools, as well as the rural schools, as well as the urban schools. So we are talking about average performance. And I think if we can pay attention to the schools which are less resourced, away from the urban centers, and give them the support they need, that would be good. Now, the other thing, my response is that this model is not to encourage every country to be top performing like the East Asian countries. And I don't think countries like Australia cannot afford to be top in TIMSS or PISA. Can never. The Australian economy is never built for that. So this model is to say, let's look at the factors that perhaps explain what the East Asian countries are doing well, and use these factors to further improve our own systems so that they are performing at the best they can. Not necessarily at the very top.
Okay, thank you, Professor. We'll just take a few questions from the room, and then you can respond to the questions. Any questions? Okay, yes, no question. Yeah.
Well, I just have two reflections based on the presentation. Thank you very much, Prof. I guess the first one is I was quite kind of curious in terms of what kind of research the teachers do. What informs that research? Is it the school policy that they should do research, and if they do the findings feed back to the school's development, or is just out of their own interest? If you're interested in something, then you're free to research on it. And then the other question that I had, or reflection, is that there are a lot of teachers from, at least that I know, from Africa who migrate to countries like China, South Korea to teach English. So do they get access to these kinds of schools, and do they get the same recognition?
Okay, I will answer your second question first. In terms of recognition, if you are talking about social recognition, then yes, I think, you know, if any of you land up in Korea or Japan to teach English, you will be respected definitely as a teacher. It is not where you come from, but it is the fact that you are a teacher teaching my child English, or for the matter science, you'll be respected as a teacher. So the social status is always there. In terms of what sort of professional development these teachers go through, it depends on from country to country. But by and large, I notice, when you asked me the question, I was just going through in my mind quickly that across these countries, there is no hard and fast rule. As long as you're doing research, as a teacher, you will be, it will develop in you this mindset of inquiry. You will develop this mindset of questioning your practice. So in Japan, for example, research is very often in the form of lesson study, which I believe you have heard about. Lesson study is a form of research where the teachers research the lesson plan with their colleagues. In China, research is expected of all teachers if you want to get promotion. And in China, research is pretty broad-based. You can do blue sky research, or you can do research that is relevant to your classroom. Because in mainland China, research and the extent of research you do is governed by your publications. Not in research journals, but in teacher magazines. So as long as you publish in teacher magazines, you are recognized as a teacher researcher. So therefore, the sort of research you do is pretty broad-based. In Singapore, research is again quite different. Because of the small population in Singapore, research is very often governed by the requirements of the school and the government. So there's a variety. But I think as long as teachers are engaged in research, you will develop in them this mentality of questioning what I do, what I do, and how I do things.
There's another question.
Thanks, Prof, for the presentation. It's interesting to learn about different systems. I think you know me, our focus is on higher education systems here. And so I'm just interested, just to clarify that you were specifically talking about school as in primary and high school up to sort of teenage year education. So that, just to confirm that, and then based on that, from a systems point of view, does this system, the model of the system that you presented, does it translate into higher education? Or is that run almost on a different model? And so if not, does higher education run on a different model? And if so, how does it translate into higher education?
Honestly, I don't know. No, because you see, this model came about as the explanation of the East Asian education systems. And then over time, I find that it can be used to explain how things happen in UK and other Confucian heritage cultures. And so far, we have not applied that to higher education settings. But I'm hopeful, and it'll be good if one or two of you may want to try this out. I still think that as a graduate student or as a bachelor degree students, the focus or the emphasis on active education, lecturer quality, alignment with industries, with private sectors, and the vision will still be important. So let's try that out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Do we have any questions from those joining us online? Okay, thank you, Prof, for the presentation. We have come to the end of our BBT, and we wish you well in all your endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoy spring as well. Thank you very much.